Next, Ben Hopkinson. I'm sorry, I don't know why I almost tripped over his surname then. Hopkinson, sorry, Ben, who's the head of housing and infrastructure at the Centre for Policy Studies. Well, what a day it is for talking about housing once again for this government. Maybe just not the type of discussion they want us to focus on. But Ben, I don't want to really get into Rachel Reeves, although I would love to get a comment towards the end. What I want to get into is I think this renters' rights bill that's now actually received Royal Assent and become an act of Parliament. I've seen my social media inundated with Labour communications about this is great, ending no-fault evictions finally for tenants against those pesky landlords that just apparently recklessly kick everyone out as soon as they want to, making sure that there's a fairer system when it comes to challenging unfair rental increases, etc., etc. Of course, there's bad landlords in the system. Of course, there are horrific cases that have led to, as we've seen, that tragic case of that 2-year-old losing his life due to inhaling black mould. And I've seen firsthand, as my time as a former Member of Parliament in Stoke-on-Trent North, the very disgraceful situation that some landlords leave their properties in. In fact, I even introduced a change to the law that said that for buildings of historical importance, there should be an increased fine rather than the £1,000 cap fine on the first offence for rogue and absent landlords. However, Ben, I think there's going to be quite a lot of unintended consequences, and I was keen to hear from you. Do you think that this bill is all it's going to end up being hyped to be? Is this actually long-term going to work in the interests of renters, or is this going to see landlords withdraw from the market and inevitably will lead to, therefore, rent prices going up because of a shortage of supply?
Well, I think to start off, to have a healthy rental market that serves tenants, to give them the flexibility and security that they need, you need to have benefits for landlords. Landlords ultimately need to have a sense that it's worth them buying properties, letting them out, and then holding them. So the bill, well, I guess the act now, is not going to do that. It's going to make it much harder for landlords to regain their properties once they let them out. It's going to make it much harder for landlords to impose rent increases, which actually, through the tribunal system that it's set up, it's kind of brought in rent controls through the back door, completely unintentionally. And it's adding lots more regulation to landlords. I mean, as you've already seen today, Rachel Reeves can't keep up with the regulations on landlords, and this is just going to add more to it.
Ben, one of my concerns is the fact that I spoke to a landlord yesterday and he was telling me that, for example, you could shake on a deal that says £800 a month for maybe some flat in part of the country. And that actually, once that tenancy has been agreed, even within the first 6 months, the tenant will be able to challenge that price and say they want it at a fair market value. That leads to, therefore, a tribunal, which could then see the deal unwinded. Maybe the price goes down, but it certainly can't ever go up, even if the landlord has rented out the property below market value, which some may do on some occasions, in order to get their properties off their hands and into the hand, and have an income. I saw as well a post which quite disturbed me, which says that some legal experts were warning about the fact that, according to the new act, you can't ask for the month's rent until the tenant signs the contract. You need to be aware that once the contract is signed, if the tenant then refuses to pay over the rent, the contract must still stand and you will have to hand over the keys. If the tenant then refuses to pay thereafter, you have to go for a Section 8 proceedings for arrears. But you can't do this until at least 3 months' rent is outstanding, and you have to give 4 weeks' notice for that. So effectively, you can't do anything for 4 months to just get the process started. This is a nightmare scenario. These are the kind of things that you're on about here, the unintended consequences that many landlords now will be speaking with legal experts in this area and going, you know what, I just don't want the hassle. Or do I sign up with Serco and get one of these 10-year luxury deals to lend my property out for illegal migrants, which is also being offered in places like I live in Stoke-on-Trent to many landlords presently?
Yeah, so that nightmare scenario that you're describing, where a tenant signs a lease and then just doesn't pay and you can't evict them for 4 months, it's actually longer than that, because you'd need to get the tribunal to rule that they're kind of in massive arrears, and then you'd need to join the queue to get bailiffs around to actually evict them. So there's a very real chance that you could go about a year or more without having any rental income, and that's disastrous for landlords and makes you wonder, why even bother? So ultimately, the kind of suite of legislation means that if you're a landlord, you better be letting it out to someone that you know, or someone who you can verify is going to be a good tenant. And that means that for people who are just moving into their first property or don't have a kind of a stellar CV, for example, they probably won't have landlords let to them. And if they don't know any landlords, they probably won't be able to get a private tenancy. And those are the kind of people who the bill is really aimed to help. And they are actually at the kind of coalface of being without any chance of ever having a private rental. So the disastrous consequences are real, and I think we're going to start feeling them once the act really gets into motion.
I'm still really hit by the fact that when President Millet, and of course he's now well spoken about after that unexpected but big electoral victory he had recently, one of the first things he did was very quickly deregulate the property sector, particularly the rental sector. And I think vacancies within Buenos Aires went up by 45% within the first 6 months, as in terms of properties that were coming forward in order for people to be able to rent, which at the same time, therefore, brought rental prices down because there was more supply on the market. Do you want to see any future government manifesto from any political party take very seriously the supply and demand issue and be willing maybe to even say they should be willing to withdraw this act to Parliament and come back with other ideas, maybe around Section 21 notices that is fair to tenants but also, as you say, fair to landlords too?
Yeah, so if you're kind of the Labour Party and you have this ideological hatred of landlords, the best way to kind of punish them is to build many more homes. So forcing landlords to compete against each other rather than just lopping on loads and loads of extra regulation to them. So the main reason why we have kind of these horror stories from tenants with their rogue landlords is not because of a lack of regulation, it's a lack of supply. So there's a vacancy rate of less than 1% in London. So that means landlords are very confident that they can get a tenant in, which means that there's no need for them to do maintenance on the property or to charge kind of an affordable rent because they know that they'll always have a queue for tenants. So ultimately, what we need is not more regulation. We need to make it much easier to build homes. And you can see landlords actually compete. So Austin in Texas built 20,000 new flats last year.
Wow.
That's the equivalent of 180,000 in London. And rents have fallen. And landlords are now competing, offering months off of rent to get tenants to re-sign. And that's possible. We just need to build more.
And then finally, Ben, if I may, obviously, Rachel Reeves, you pointed out earlier, regulation has caused a headache here. Do you think this scheme that's been going on in Southwark, and indeed she herself has campaigned for in Leeds, where she's obviously a constituency member of Parliament, these agreements that licences that landlords have to sign up to, do they actually have any really good effect? Do they hold landlords to a higher standard, or is it just simply a tick box exercise that never really actually drives up anything? Because, as you say, ultimately demand is so high and supply is so low that basically, and councils probably don't even have the funds to properly go around and vet all these properties, that many people are able just to slip through the net and be rogue and absent landlords.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Rachel Reeves wishes it wasn't a thing. So these regulations are just kind of tick box exercises that you can get caught out on. I'm sure it was an honest mistake in Reeves's case, but the fact that we have so much regulation for landlords just makes it much more likely that you make a mistake, and ultimately that disincentivizes more people to become landlords, more people to let out their properties.
Well, look, Ben Hopkinson there from the Centre for Policy Studies, who's the head of housing and infrastructure. Thank you so much for joining us and showing that great example there. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you think about the Renters' Rights Bill? Are you something this is you welcome, the end of no-fault evictions, the ability to challenge landlords over their prices that they charge per calendar month? Or, as Ben's been pointing out, are you concerned of the unintended consequences of well-meaning legislation, but ultimately will drive more landlords out the market and do more harm to housing supply at a time when Labour has, it's been reported, accepted they will not be able to hit their promised 1.5 million homes by the end of this Parliament? Well,